Welcome to the Clear Lens podcast with me, Audrey Kissan. I hope this will be a place where you can get clarity on what's really going on in the world. We're at an inflection point, and it is pretty clear that bias and misinformation are eroding the public's trust in news media. It can be so tempting to tune out, but I really hope you don't. I hope you tune in here instead. I hope you listen in on the chats I'll be having with experts, leaders and advocates who really are passionate about giving you more clarity on important issues facing us all today. In episode 1, I'm sitting down with Brian Cuthbert, who you'll know as the Accidental Rapper. Brian is a powerhouse, an amazing human being. He is the Programme Director at Uplift and has spent years campaigning on democracy, human rights and climate justice issues. He's a conscious hip-hop artist and a passionate defender of Irish neutrality. And that's what I'll be talking to Brian about today. We're going to chat about how Irish neutrality is inseparable from Irish sovereignty.
Where we can really punch above our weight in bringing wars to an end is through diplomacy and being a neutral peace broker.
We'll start our chat by finding out what made Brian an activist in the first place.
I guess it's something I kind of stumbled into, probably like most people. I know the first kind of official kind of campaign or whatever I got involved in was after I moved to Dublin. It was a campaign. It was a issue around something called TTIP, which was the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which sounds really boring by design. It's
right,
not,
they all do, don't they?
Not for general consumption, but it was something I stumbled across. I think I was reading a George Monbiot article in, I don't know, The Guardian or something, and he was talking about this trade deal, and it was basically it would allow corporations to sue governments if the governments brought in rules that would affect their profits. So if you were to bring in, like if you were to increase the minimum wage, or if you were to bring in protections around, like consumer protections around safety and things, or if you were to bring in like climate restrictions on products and emissions, then the corporations that were affected by those changes, obviously if they have to pay their workers more money, they'll have less profits left over. They could then sue that government for damages. And it seemed like ridiculously unfair and kind of corrupt. And again, I didn't see anyone else talking about it. And I said, what does like this? And probably naive at the time. I was a lot younger, but it was something that I was just like, I didn't know anything about activism. I wasn't involved in any groups. Like my family and friends weren't involved in politics or activism or anything like that. So I didn't know where to go with this. So I was just emailing TDs and MEPs like on my own, just being like, hey, this thing is like really serious. I want you to vote this way or that way in when it comes to the European Parliament. And getting nowhere really. And then one day I was going to hurling training, and there was like a little poster on stuck to a lamppost, and it was Joan Collins, who's a TD in Crumlin. I was playing hurling out in Crumlin.
Yeah.
And she was like, public meeting on TTIP. And I was like, this is the thing I've been talking about that nobody else, other people know about this. So I went along to that, and I know there was like 20 other people at it, and I was the youngest person there by about 40 years, I would say, except there was one other guy roughly my own age, and I ended up chatting to him, and he was involved in loads of different activist groups, and he like brought me along to other things, and I ended up getting involved in housing campaigns and climate campaigns, and I kind of just grew from there.
It snowballs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that's probably where it started, I'd say. Although I have a better story for you. I remember I was in I went to primary school in Sculcrease 3 in Turner's Cross, and I remember there was when I was in 5th class, I was 11 or something. There was a fella came into us with like a really like a battered Kit Kat bar, and he was like telling the class about like why everyone should stop buying Nestle and all these things that Nestle were doing in sub-Saharan Africa, where they were like falsely advertising their products, and they were dressing marketers up as doctors and telling newborn mothers that like, you should buy our breast milk, or they give them a gift of like 3 months worth of breast milk, Nestle breast milk, and then obviously when that ran out, the mother's milk would have dried up, and they'd have to keep
were
buying
dependent.
And like people weren't washing the bottles correctly, and babies were getting sick and essentially dying from just a marketing scam. And I remember like he was saying to us like, nobody buy Nestle products, and everyone was laughing at him in the class, like people didn't care. But I remember it stuck with me, and I remember like I went home and I was saying to my mother, like I haven't bought a Nestle product since, and that was 20 odd years ago. And
That's
I went
incredible.
home and I said it to my mother as well, and she was like, okay, grand, she won't buy them either. Um, I remember I actually emailed that fella. I hunted him down about 3 or 4 years ago, and I just emailed him being like, "Hey, I don't know if you realize, but like you came into this class 25 years ago, or whatever, and you mightn't have felt like you made any impact, but like I haven't bought a single Nestle product in since I heard you speak, and neither has my mother, and like I've gotten more involved in this type of work since, and I just want to say like fair play or whatever." So yeah, I think that's probably a nicer story in terms of like small impacts that people you don't realize you can make on people.
Yeah, that you still remember that clearly. And I think, when I think of activism myself, I wouldn't consider myself an activist as such, but when I look objectively at what I do, I am. But it's there's something about the word. It's like, to me, it's just being a human. You know,
Yeah,
I don't understand, where the outrage is absent in so many people when they hear stories like that. But actually, I suppose people kind of look and say, well, why is it so strong in you? Um, but I think it is more natural to have that outrage. And I think you need it, that sense of fairness and justice and right and wrong, just to drive you, you
yeah, no,
know?
and I think like through no fault of people's own, but like we're encouraged to be individuals and to
Mm,
drive to work in
yeah,
your own car on your own,
yeah, yeah.
have your own house, don't live with housemates, like it's all like
Individualistic.
and and it's just materialistic. You're encouraged to buy your own thing, don't share with your neighbors, have your own XYZ.
Yeah, yeah,
Like there's the kind of community is being sucked out of most most places in Ireland really these days.
yeah.
Um,
Agree.
and just to not conform to that is seen as like a radical thing, but
Yeah,
it should be common sense, or it should be the norm.
that's
But again,
right.
it's like if you're going against the grain or whatever, you'll be, oh, you're an activist, you're an XYZ. It's like, no, I feel like what I'm doing isn't that extreme
Mm.
or that
Or
radical.
radical.
No,
It's right. It's kind of, there's a bit of a distortion there, where this like hyper consumerism is the norm.
yeah,
And stepping away from that, you're quickly labeled. You're quickly kind of given all these kind of labels, whether it's a commie or a left wing Trump, as Leo Varadkar called me, in an exchange when I said to him, uh, he was responding to a comment from a lady who said, would you not, do you think the government should avoid going to the White House this St. Patrick's Day, given the US complicity in the genocide in Palestine? Really fair, honest question. And he responded and he said, well, we can't just do what feels good. We have to, I suppose his argument was, we have to look after our economy too. And that really set me off, because it's like, we can't just do what feels good, as though having morals is a nice additional extra
yeah,
that's
yeah,
just for, performance, and that it's not real. And so my response to him was that economic interests aren't a defense for complicity to genocide. Nowhere in the Genocide Convention does it say, well, actually, this doesn't apply if your economic interests are at risk. Human rights are inalienable.
yeah.
And it's just become so normal to put economic interests over human life, that when you say and assert the opposite, when you say, well, actually, the law is written differently, basic human morality and ethics has it differently, yet in any exchange you see, whether it is, on a prime time program on, any of our channels, you'll have these economists and they will say, basically, economic interests trump all. It's a very strange kind of environment we're in, this really hyper neoliberal capitalist stage that we're at, that it is radical to say, actually, human life comes above economic interests.
Yeah. And I
It's
mean,
crazy.
and like you said, it's completely the opposite in terms of if you're looking at the Genocide Convention. It says quite the opposite. There's
Mm,
a legal expert, Dr. Irene Petropoli, did a great piece for Al Haq and Somo in the Netherlands, where she just reviews the complicity of third parties in Gaza's genocide. She
mm.
goes through. I'd recommend anyone to read it.
I could put it in the
It's
comments.
like it's a legal opinion, but it's very well written. Like it's easy to read. It's easy to parse. Like I'm not a legal
Right.
expert, and
Yeah.
you could skim it and you would pick it up. But it basically just highlights that like countries that are facilitating this genocide in any way through supplying weapons or facilitating the supply of weapons, but also countries that are refusing to cut off trade. Like
Mm.
under Genocide Convention, we are obligated to prevent and punish the crime of genocide. We're
Absolutely.
not preventing it. We're allowing.
Prevent is a key word there because, again, this is where I went down a rabbit hole in my discussion with Leo Varadkar. He said we need to respect the rule of law. The court hasn't called this a genocide yet. It may not even be ruled a genocide. And that is exactly the point I made. The Genocide Convention isn't just about punishing genocide, it's about preventing and stopping. And the international community is not taking that seriously at all, preventing and stopping.
But also, punishing is an important word there because if you look at
Yeah.
Ireland's action, like the Irish government get a ton of credit internationally, um, but if you look at the things that they have done,
Mm,
they
yeah.
they have drawn a line at punishing Israel. They will refuse to do anything that punishes Israel. So like
Yeah.
recognizing the state of Palestine is a
Mm,
lovely gesture.
yeah.
It doesn't punish Israel. Sending money to
Mm,
UNRWA is brilliant. It doesn't
hmm.
punish Israel. The Occupied
Mm,
Territories Bill would actually be a sanction or a punishment to Israel, and again,
yeah.
it wouldn't be the biggest thing they could do. It's not the Occupied Territories Bill is not a huge ask in terms of
Mm.
impact, but it would mark crossing that
It would
line
set
into
a
punishing
precedent.
Israel, and that's
Yeah.
where they absolutely will not trade. So yeah,
Yeah.
they are in violation of those obligations, quite clearly. But as I said, that piece by Irene Petropoli, it goes through that and also highlights corporations' complicity. But yeah,
Yeah.
facilitation and trade is outlined there as like these are ways that you are facilitating or complicit in a genocide.
Yeah. And on that, on the Occupied Territories Bill, especially, there was a massive, massive campaign to put pressure on the government to implement the Occupied Territories Bill. There was the Walk the Petition campaign. I myself did a leg with my local Clare group in Clare, like all around the country. The determination led by South Kerry for Palestine. It was incredible to see it. Such a strong people's movement. And in the election campaign, we were given promises by the government. Yes, yes, we all agree. We all agree. And then the government returns, cobbled together with the cohort of, I call them double agent independents, because that's, yeah. And all of a sudden, the Occupied Territories Bill is being sidelined, and in place of it, we're getting the IHRA definition, which conflates criticism of Israel with anti Semitism, which makes Israel beyond reproach, would essentially put some muzzle on opposition to Israel. Very, very kind of anti democratic definition, and also a very anti democratic maneuver by the Irish government. And in that vein, what also, and just to kind of lead into the most important subject we want to cover today, which is neutrality. In their pre-election manifestos, particularly Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, there was no mention of the triple lock and dismantling it. Then, soon after, the government comes in, all of a sudden it's on the agenda. Could we first get started by talking about what the triple lock is and why it is the core of our neutrality and what dismantling it will do?
Yeah, well, in saying it's the core of our neutrality, you are quoting the Taoiseach Micheál Martin from 2013, but we'll get that later. If we want to go back along, so I guess Irish neutrality essentially was kind of born out of our independence and out of our refusal to take part in World War Two. Before that, it's worth noting that during World War One, John Redmond, who was campaigning for Home Rule,
Yeah.
agreed to send Irish troops to fight in World War One alongside the British. about 200,000 troops did, and 50,000 Irish soldiers were killed in World War One. Again, that a huge sacrifice, and at the end of the day, home rule wasn't even granted to us.
Yeah.
So then, when World War Two came around and we gained our independence, we decided to sit it out for a number of reasons. But one of the most primary reasons, which was stated by Eamon de Valera, was that Ireland is a small country and would have no business essentially getting involved in wars between major powers, because we would not have any agency in when that war begins, how that war is fought, or when that war would end. Our only option would be to go along and send lambs to the slaughter, send people to fight and die. That's the only input we'd be given. And you're seeing that even with what's happening in Ukraine now. This is a proxy war, as Boris Johnson literally said a couple of months back, that this is a proxy war between Russia and the US. And Ukraine weren't even invited to the negotiating table. Like, it's like small countries are not given the agency to act with sovereignty in these situations. And that's why Ireland chose to remain neutral and stay out of these wars. Again, with World War II as well, it was also the element of not having Irish people fighting alongside British soldiers who had been
colonizing and oppressing us for 800 years.
and killing and burning houses for centuries.
And just on that as well, though, that is such a clear explanation of what neutrality is for Ireland. And what really comes through is that it is just such a core expression of our sovereignty, our really, really hard-won independence and sovereignty is, that kind of determination to kind of remove ourselves from conflicts of much larger empires for which, like you said, we have no agency. We are cannon fodder. We are pawns in these battles. And it is such a kind of there's pride in standing away from that and asserting your neutrality and your sovereignty, isn't there?
And it goes further. I mean, like, following that thread on, you would have had people like Frank Aiken, who, I mean, was not, because people like to paint neutrality as like cowardice or backing out or whatever.
Yes, that's right.
I mean, Frank Aiken was no coward.
He had a showdown, didn't he, in the White House with Roosevelt?
I didn't know about that, but even in terms of his role in the IRA and everything else, like he was feared.
Yeah.
But then again, he went into politics and became a voice for peace at the UN, and crucially became a voice for small nations at the UN, and standing up for small nations and the non-aligned movement. And he was the first person to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Right.
So again, Ireland's neutrality should be one of active neutrality and active peace brokering. It's not a neutral position of we're going to sit this one out. It's no,
absolutely.
All wars, and like this is the clearest point I can make on any of this. All wars end through diplomacy. They all end through diplomacy. And that's where Ireland can punch above our weight. Like, I remember I have a song about Irish neutrality, and I was playing at Electric Picnic last year, and I made the point that there's 7,000 troops in the Irish Army at the moment. There was 30,000 people at Electric Picnic. Ireland wouldn't really make a dent in the war in Ukraine, even if we were to send every single soldier that we have, which obviously you wouldn't do. But where we can really punch above our weight in bringing wars to an end is through diplomacy and being a neutral peace broker. Like you said, we were colonized for centuries. We're one of the only white Western European rich countries who were the victims of colonization. We never colonized anybody, and we're actually the victims of colonization. So from that perspective, we actually have such a good reputation with countries in the global north and countries in the global south who don't see us as we're not in the textbooks as the enemy in anyone's history books in school. And we never invade anybody. That people always talk about how strong the Irish passport is, and you go abroad, everybody loves the Irish. It's because we never invade anybody. We're not anybody's enemy in the history books. Nobody's grandfather has stories of when the Irish invaded and XYZ. That's part of the reason. And Irish people are very proud of this. Like, instinctively, people understand this. Uplift ran polling. Well, actually, Uplift commissioned the polling. It was Ireland Thinks who ran the polling. So they're an independent polling agency. They ran nationwide polling all over the country, and it showed that 75% of people support Ireland's neutrality current policy on
Massive.
neutrality.
Yes.
And that went across, we got the breakdowns, and it shows across all ages, across all counties, all occupations, all age levels, that majority held. And interestingly, it was broken down between political parties. And even
Yes.
within Fianna Fáil voters, 75% of Fianna Fáil voters support our
Yes.
current policy on neutrality. So the government has absolutely no mandate for this. Their
No.
voters don't support it, the Irish people don't support it, which is why they are having to be more authoritarian with how they're trying to push this through.
Yes, and that's the key word, that they're being authoritarian about it, because we're not going to get to vote on this. And I wanted to just kind of give the listeners some context about, like what you've said, 75% is a massive majority. Like, it is such a strong, and like, that polling is consistent. It isn't just the Uplift one, it's across
No,
other
and you
polls
see
as
it
well.
too.
Um,
Sorry, go ahead.
you do, sorry, no, you do see it. But I remember the Nice Treaty
Yeah.
back in 2001. And the Irish population were spooked about that treaty because of the Solidarity Clause, which said that if a member of the European Union is attacked, then all others must go to its defence. And rightly, there was a strong public campaign saying, no, Ireland can't have any act or part in this. Our neutrality is the core to who we are. We don't want to cede it to join a European army. So we rejected the Nice Treaty the first time around, and largely because of the issue of neutrality. So because Ireland, our small nation, nearly derailed an entire European project because we had to vote on it, there was, can you imagine the ructions in Europe? So that is when the triple lock was basically offered to the Irish public as a promise that our neutrality would always be protected. And that triple lock put three locks essentially on the deployment of peacekeeping troops. And the most important there, which is the one I suppose the government is attempting to get rid of, is the UN mandate. So that kind of says that Irish peacekeeping troops cannot be deployed without a UN mandate. Now, the government is saying that that is the veto in the UN is the reason why we've got to undo the triple lock. And will we just have a chat about that, about your thoughts on the UN veto?
Just to follow up as well, that the Lisbon Treaty reaffirmed the triple lock, whereby, again, the Irish public were asked to vote,
Yes.
rejected it, and then were told very democratically, oh, you got that wrong, you have to vote again. But we were again given reassurances that we would not be dragged into any EU army. And yeah, the core of the triple lock does come from two from two referendums, where the Irish public quite clearly made their position known.
Yes.
So to get rid of it without asking the public, when there is no support and there is no demand for this, yeah, you can see that quite clearly this isn't born out of any genuine concerns.
No.
So yeah, the as you said, the three locks, the UN authorization is what they're calling into question. They will say that the UN Security Council needs to give us permission, and that Russia has a veto and China has a veto, and we can't allow anyone to have a veto over where we send Irish troops.
Yeah.
As you know, that is not the case. If you read the Defence Amendment Act 2006, you can see that nearly 20 years ago in black and white, quite clearly it says UN authorization. This can be UN Security Council authorization or UN General Assembly authorization. And as we all know, there is no veto at the UN General Assembly. So
Yes.
this idea that Russia could veto is nonsense. And if you were to pull that thread a bit further, even if that motion did go through the UN Security Council and Russia vetoed,
Yeah.
the UN General Assembly could take action through a Uniting for Peace resolution,
Absolutely.
and then the motion will go to the UN General Assembly. If it passes there, it can go to the Security Council for another chance to authorize. If they agree, then the mission will be passed and troops will be mandated to take part. If they don't agree, the mission can still go ahead, but it will be voluntary. So participation will be voluntary. So Ireland
Yep.
could choose to take part, which is the ultimate sovereignty that the Irish government is able to send their
Absolutely.
troops wherever they want.
Yes. Yes.
Well, on any mission that was authorized, but you know what I mean.
I do.
So it is an anti-argument, and crucially, I think it's worth noting that this has been building for a long time. alongside and in correlation with the growth of the arms industry in Ireland.
Yeah.
And we're seeing, I mean, a few years ago, Simon Coveney was in this position of trying to erode neutrality, and he hosted essentially an arms fair in the RDS. Um, and now we're seeing the Ditch reporting last year that IDSA, which is the Irish Defence and Security Association, had been
The
meeting,
lobby group.
yeah, which is an
Yeah.
arms lobby, and they represent Lockheed Martin, they represent all these companies, have a meeting with the Department of Defence in
That's right.
secret, and been told
Yes.
not to publish any minutes and all these things. And you, when you connect those two dots, all of the scaremongering falls to the wayside.
It does, it does. And Enterprise Ireland were also at that meeting. And I mean, you've got to wonder about what are the economic plans here? Are they seeing defence spending as a kind of key component in our FDI, our foreign direct investment, which was kind of what the Ditch was reporting? You've got to look at the people that are meeting in secret without the knowledge of the public, and the positions they hold, which is,
And again,
the
that's
economy.
worth clarifying when you look at Micheál Martin's position in 2013. In 2020, the Fianna Fáil manifesto said we are committed to the triple lock as a core component of Irish
Yeah.
neutrality. That was in the election before last. So when you think of what has changed since then,
Yes.
given that there is no public support for this and there is no support even within Fianna Fáil's own party, and we've heard from talking to different Fianna Fáil members that like there is a divide on this within their own party. Like this doesn't have popular support anywhere. Yet the
So
government
this,
are pushing, like it's one of their first pieces of legislation as a new government. It's a
that's right.
top priority for them. Housing, like homelessness, will probably go to 20,000 under this government. Every climate target will be missed, but this is the one thing that they want to push through beyond all else. And again, hugely unpopular position, which would explain why they are stacking the doll in the way they're stacking it. They're preparing to push through very unpopular decisions, by
And they're
hell or by
weakening
water.
the opposition. And yeah, like that weakening, the theme that's kind of coming through here is how anti-democratic all of this is. Like we've spoken about the emergence of the triple lock as an assurance to a public who clearly voted against a treaty because of the very issue of neutrality. We're dismantling what was made as a promise and an assurance to the Irish public without a vote, even though the polls clearly indicate that the vast majority of Irish people don't want it. What concerns me is the media debate around this, because a public cannot be made aware of these things unless people like journalists do the job of educating them and explaining to them what these things mean. The media narrative so far has really centered on the issue of Russia isn't the boss of us. And that UN Security Council veto. We have explained that that is a non-issue. Today, you had is it Anne Rabbitte? Anne Rabbitte, yeah, she is the Fianna Fáil senator, admitting as much. But the damage is done and the horses have bolted. And everywhere you see a conversation about this, you hear this tough guy talk of Russia is the boss of us. We can't be letting them tell us what to do, which is nonsense. Ireland is supposed to be a peacekeeper. The mechanisms are in place to avoid the veto. Not saying the UN is perfect by any stretch. It isn't. It is in need of reform. But on the issue of neutrality, there are ways and means of us, not being locked in or dictated to by the permanent members of the Security Council. But on that media narrative, especially, there isn't enough, I think, information getting to the public about why we're doing this, the real reason behind what is driving this. There isn't enough conversation about how anti-democratic it is. I have heard Miriam O'Callaghan in a debate with Richard Boyd Barrett, who's phenomenal. He's, I don't know how he keeps his sanity half the time having conversations like this. But you know what she said? She said, when he put it to her that 75% of the public want to keep our neutrality, she said, well, it isn't really about democracy, it's about safety.
Yeah.
And that blows my mind that, it just blows my mind that democracy goes out the window if you can present this idea that we're somehow unsafe. What do you think of that? And
Yeah,
the
I mean,
media narrative in general?
they know this, and it's been so interesting over the last. I mean, interesting and also incredibly frustrating to see the very slick and deliberate propaganda that's being put forward by the anti-neutrality side, or by the very small number of people who would gain and profit from this.
Yeah.
I mean, years ago, countries used to have a minister for war, and they've rebranded that to the Minister for Defense, which again is just
Subtle,
it's
but
just
insidious. Yeah.
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 So anywhere you hear defense, just be a little bit cagey.
Yeah.
But yeah, they've I mean they've learned, tried and tested across all different countries, that if you can scare people enough, that they will roll over
This is
and
it.
accept whatever it is that you're selling.
Yes.
I mean, you saw it with the war in Iraq, for example.
Yes.
Weapons of mass destruction. Oh fuck, Jesus, London could be wiped out, whatever it was.
Yes.
And people rolled over and went along with it.
There
And
was
that's
levels of danger. They were color coded.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Terror
all this
threat
is.
alert.
They know
Yeah.
that human beings, when they're scared, become
Yes.
apathetic.
Yes.
Um,
And
so
submissive.
yeah, so I mean, I do think that the media has a massive role and obligation to play. I will give you credit to Colm O'Mungan for challenging Anne Rabbit on that veto
Today.
yesterday, or yeah, last, I
Or
think it
yes.
was on last night's debate,
Sorry.
but it was yeah, people were sharing it today.
Right.
Um,
Okay. Yeah.
but I was on the late debate, and challenging her and saying there is no veto at the UN General Assembly. And you saw her, she wasn't expecting that, because up to this point the media have played their role
That's
and
right.
sided with the government, and she was caught off guard by that, and she stutters for about 30 seconds
Yes.
before she eventually just ditches that sentence and decides to say, okay, we're not having a referendum, is a
Yeah.
crazy plan B if you're trying to get out of a difficult situation.
Yes.
But yeah, I agree with you in terms of the debate around this. And this is where I would say one of the best things people can do is to just insulate themselves to these arguments by realizing, just taking a breath when you read something that says, I mean, there was an article today saying Irish people need to store up food for fear of attack. Like,
Yes. Here we go.
yeah,
Here we go. Yeah. You can see what's
Russia
happening.
is currently bogged down in a war that thought it would take them. They thought the war in Ukraine would take them, what, 3 days or something. It's 3 years on, they're still there. They are not crossing Europe to invade Ireland anytime soon. Also worth noting that during World War II, Belfast was bombed. There was over
Yeah.
1,000 people killed in Belfast from bombings.
I did not know that it was 1,000 people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the south of Ireland was not bombed, other than an accidental hit strike in Northwall. But our neutrality does actually keep us safe. Again,
Yes.
our place in the world and our role in the world should be as active peace brokers, which is something that our government is not doing in this either. I haven't, like, Turkey has held peace talks. I haven't seen the Irish government offering to hold peace talks when it comes to Ukraine. Yet they are willing to send people off to fight in and die in this. But no, to go back to your main point, the narrative around this, it's not even coherent. Like, you will hear undersea cables mentioned.
That's right.
Undersea cables has nothing, like, the triple lock is about sending troops abroad. Undersea cables has nothing to do with sending troops abroad. You can protect undersea cables, well, to an extent. You can protect undersea cables now if you want. It's a nonsense argument because they go the whole way across the Atlantic, and you actually can't really protect them, which is why the government says it.
Yeah.
Like, you're wasting your time even talking about it. But
Yeah.
it has nothing to do with sending troops abroad. Cyber attacks, that is an issue for the police. That has nothing to do with the army in the first place, and it's
Yes.
nothing to
Yes.
do with sending troops abroad. Protecting Irish airspace and Irish seas, nothing to do, like,
They're all red herrings. They're
the,
all
legis-
red
the
herrings. Yeah.
legislation they're proposing is to dismantle the triple lock, which is about
Yes.
sending troops overseas. If you're concerned with the safety of Ireland, why is this the only policy position that you're pushing? It doesn't.
Yeah.
It quite clearly shows their hand if you take 2 seconds and you take a deep breath to realize what their agenda is.
Yes.
To make your point as well on the veto, the government have no good reason to get rid of the triple lock, and they know it. The veto is their strongest argument because they know people hear it and they think, oh, that sounds like a bad thing. But it's not
Yes.
true. When you unpack it, they actually have no good reason left, because, as you said, the veto isn't an issue. The UN General Assembly, by all accounts, is the best thing we have to the opinion of the rest of the world. I mean, they've constantly passed resolutions calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, to end the blockade of Cuba,
Yeah.
to end nuclear proliferation. Like, it's we shouldn't be going anywhere without UN authorization. The only thing that we're not allowed to do under the Triple Lock is join unsanctioned wars like the illegal invasion of Iraq or Afghanistan. That is actually the only thing that we
Yes.
can't do. The Triple Lock works
Yeah.
extremely well at keeping us safe and allowing us to
Hmm.
participate in sanctioned peacekeeping missions, which is the only role that we should be playing other than diplomacy.
Yes. And, you know, because exactly what you said there, it stops us from joining illegal wars and it protects us. One thing that concerns me is, I suppose, the level of investment and the ambitions that are set out in the government's plan for investment in the defence forces, and just the general direction that Ireland is taking within Europe. There seems to be an ambition. Like when you look at that plan, they define it as LOA 2 and LOA 3, level of ambition 2, level of ambition 3, and it defines, you know, what state they want the defence forces to be in, given, you know, within a given time frame. And you start hearing this language about, you know, being NATO ready, being able to respond to an attack, air combat. And you're thinking, this is really frightening language. And it is very much aligned with the ambitions of European battle groups and European rapid deployment capacity groups. Um, this is a move towards higher intensity, it's militarization. We are shedding neutrality and we are shedding our sovereignty in the process of it. Like you say, um, it's being packaged that we are maintaining our neutrality, and this is the part that I find so hard to accept and get through to people, because if you just distill the facts, I mean, it's so obvious. Like, why is the chief of staff of the Irish Defence Forces, why is he going to be chairing the European Military Committee in May? We are a small neutral country. Why are we buying fighter jets? And why are we removing the locks on the deployment of our troops so that we can send more without the need for multilateral diplomacy? I think when you say it out loud and you hear it out loud, there can really only be one conclusion. And that is that, sorry, yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. And I will, again, if we're looking at this kind of Orwellian language, level of
Mm,
ambition, you should think level of expenditure.
yes.
You know what I mean? Like that's
Yeah. Yes.
level of wealth transfer. Like that's what it is.
Yes. Yes.
Again, like we said before, like Ireland, small country, uh, our army is not set up for like going into full scale war, battlefield
Hmm.
wars, anything like that. Um,
Hmm.
our army and by and large, um, a lot of the people who are currently serving the army would agree with this in terms of like the PD4 soldiers and things like that.
Hmm.
They do not want any part to be playing in these aggressive wars or colonialism or increased militarism.
Hmm.
A lot of
Hmm.
people joined up the Irish Army for peacekeeping missions,
Yes.
not ever expecting to be sent to any sort of
Hmm.
combatant roles,
Yeah,
um, which is what the Irish people want from our military. That is what we expect.
absolutely.
If we were to be invaded by anybody, most likely it would be the US, the UK, or France, our closest neighbours. Just geographically speaking, that is the chances are the people next year are the ones who might likely invade you. We wouldn't be able to fight off those armies in a million years, no matter how much money we spent, no matter how many fighter
No,
jets we had. Um,
no.
and that's not how we didn't gain our independence through battlefield armies. It was through guerrilla warfare, same as Vietnam and so many other
Hmm.
places. So this idea that we're going to build up an army that can fight Russia, it's complete pie in the sky. It is literally just a way of tricking taxpayers into handing their money over to arms dealers who have the ear of the government.
Hmm.
I mean, it's interesting to see like Leo Varadkar now has taken up a lobbying position after he left government as the Taoiseach. And I'd be very curious to see where some other government ministers go after they retire.
Yeah.
Um, but this is nothing more than a shell game to trick the public into handing over more arms to or more money to arms dealers. There is
Hmm.
nothing deeper than this. They do not care about Irish people's safety and security. If they did, they'd be investing in the things that actually keep us safe, like housing,
Hmm.
like healthcare.
Hmm. Yes.
That they're not interested in your safety. That's not a concern for them. So don't
Mm-hmm.
have anybody listening buy that logic because it's as I said, it's just a shell game, and yeah,
Hmm.
they know very well what they're doing, and you saw a very coordinated kind of media onslaught for a couple of weeks there, where they were
Yes.
on every radio program, they were on op-eds in all the major newspapers, um, because they know that they need to convince people and they need to scare people, because instinctively the Irish people don't support this and they have no mandate to do it.
Hmm. Yes. And it is that fear tactic. There, one thing as well that I just wanted to discuss um, is the Defence Forces recruitment campaign, which is
Yeah.
what it is right now. And I've been following that closely. I've been following the language of it, I've been following the tone of it. And I think the most important thing to get across is that working class people are the people who join the army. Um, and the government targets them, actively targets them. It's it's a really I, I I find it difficult to actually look at these ads and see the level of manipulation and exploitation in them, where you have taglines like "Be more," as though the assertion is that they feel less than. Um, And you're thinking to yourself, these aren't going to be in the leafy suburbs of Dublin 4. These are going to be on bus stops in the most disadvantaged parts of the country. And it feels predatory. And I just think we need to shine a massive light on that, because you're going to see this glamorization of joining the Defence Forces. You're going to see really attractive entry level packages, like 42,000, I think, is the start. They're throwing the kitchen sink at it, every kind of a benefit and bell and whistle. Um, and yeah, it just seems as though it's not, given the move away from neutrality, given Europe's ambitions. I know what you're saying, that there may never actually be escalations in in terms of actual wars, but there will be, I suppose, higher intensity peace operations. That's the language they're using. Um, and it's the people they're exploiting to fulfill those kind of goals of empire. What are your thoughts on that, on the targeting
Well,
and the Defence Force recruitment?
yeah. Well, one point just to clarify, that whether there is some sort of an escalation or a war with Russia in the current in the next few years, once we lose the triple lock, it's gone forever. Our neutrality is gone forever. Who
That's
knows what will
right.
happen in 20 years, like 15 years, 12 years, 9 years, whatever it is. I mean, there
Hmm.
could be. It's more likely that Irish troops, if after we move the triple lock, would be sent on some mission supporting Israel than it is that we would be doing anything around actual peacekeeping once the triple lock is gone. Like, if you look
Mm.
at the NATO allies and the types of missions that they're sent on, this idea that we're going to maintain our current role and our good standing globally is not it's naive. But yeah, in terms of the Defence Force recruiting, it is really sinister.
Mm.
I've been sent pictures from secondary schools of posters on the wall that say things like, "Oh, what did you do last weekend? If you didn't meet up with 200 buddies and go shoot AK-47s or whatever, then you again you're lesser than, or you had a shit weekend and you're no crack."
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Again, just targeting insecure teenagers, which is
Yes.
incredible. Like, you have billion-dollar industries set up to make money from arms and weapons, which make their money from killing people, essentially.
Hmm. Yes.
Targeting individual teenagers, trying to make them feel insecure, to then
Mm.
go and sign up to put their lives on the line
Hmm.
for these warmongers.
Yeah.
And yeah, the Defence Forces recruitment has gone into overdrive. You're seeing it an awful lot more
Mm.
than you used to. And you're
Yes.
right. It's not Micheál Martin's son who's going to go off
No, it
and fight in this
isn't.
war. But yeah, Micheál Martin is the one who's talking tough and all. Of course, yeah, I actually think Tom Clonan did a good job of calling this out in the radio. Oh, who was he debating? Oh,
Think again.
I'm drawing
Yeah.
a blank, but I'll come back to you. But yeah,
Mm.
he's just saying, look, with all due respect, like, you're not the one who's going to be sent to fight. Um, it's ordinary working class people who
I
do
think
not.
this was a news talk drive time. I'm pretty sure. Was
Potentially,
it?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and like we said before, it's ordinary working class people who
Mm.
will not have a say on when this war begins, when this war ends, where this war goes.
Yeah.
The only option they'll be given is to go and put their lives on the line. Um,
Mm. Yeah.
It's horrendously sinister when you think about it. Like war is the worst thing that people do,
Yes.
bar nothing really. In
It's a
times of war,
failure.
you see all sorts of other crimes increase. You see rape, you see burglary, everything else goes out the window. Um, Kind of society breaks down essentially.
Yeah.
War zones are the worst places on earth that people could be. People never recover, even psychologically, if they survive. You ruin their lives, and
Yeah.
they're trying to entice people into here. Do you want to come ruin your life so that we can make more money off you? And
Absolutely.
again, there's fabulous people working in the defense forces who deserve so much better than this. In fact,
Mm.
it was funny that the PF or PD Fora were protesting about 2 years ago because they were saying that these EU battle group missions that they're being sent on wouldn't pay them enough, the same that a UN peacekeeping mission would pay them. It was paying them €100 a day less. So the UN peacekeeping missions were offering them €115 a day, whereas the EU battle groups were only offering them €15 a day.
I mean, who's
Yeah,
living on
how
that?
much should they
Like,
value them? It's,
I
you know what I mean.
mean,
And then
yeah,
again, obviously, the Irish taxpayer was made to make up the difference, and we made assurances and promises that we would actually fill the gap. But it is a horrible situation whereby people are looking to profit off people's lives, and
and working class people, let's be
completely,
straight about
yeah,
it. Working class people is who they will use, and it just kind of is another insight into how devalued the working class population is. You see, the absolute failure to intervene and manage the housing crisis by building
yeah.
a state
They
body
do
to
not
manage
care
that.
about your safety. That's not their concern.
No, or your well-being. And I just think that we need to be a lot smarter and just kind of normalize the conversation about that and not kind of consign it to radical or fringe kind of talk. It's just like make it evidence-based and look at the
Yeah,
data in front of you.
I mean, one image that always hits me is if you remember back in November when the UNIFIL soldiers were coming home from Lebanon,
Yeah,
and you saw
the
people
mother.
at people at Dublin Airport, and they were hugging their sons and daughters and saying, "Oh, he's home. I'll sleep tonight." Um,
Yes,
that's what we're talking about.
it is.
People will say goodbye to their sons and daughters at Dublin Airport, and they will never see them again. I have a friend who they lost a loved one in Ukraine, and they never got the body back. They never saw that person again. That was it. They said goodbye to them at the airport, and that was the last time they saw them. This is what we're talking
It's
about. So,
horrific.
which is why I don't know if you see, like, I'm constantly posting that hashtag of body bag bill.
Block the body bag bill. I do. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
seen that.
that is
Yeah.
what the government are proposing. And it was
Hmm.
like interestingly during the war in Iraq, the media were banned from showing images of body bags because it was understood that this would severely turn the public perception of the war and they'd lose massive support. At
Yeah.
the end of the day, this is what war comes down to. It's working class people on both sides, Ukrainians, Russians, everywhere else, working class people being fed into the grinder, essentially, not to put it too bluntly, but
Yes, it's true.
it is. While, I mean, ministers, prime ministers will fly around, jet around, go to meetings here and there.
Mm.
They're not the
Mhm.
ones on the front line. They're not the ones who are going to be affected with this. They're not the ones whose parents are going to miss them. They're not the ones whose lives are going to be torn apart.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to also say that all of this is happening in the context of international law being torn up and ripped asunder in what has been the world's first live stream genocide, where we have seen absolutely no respect for even the status of a civilian.
Mm.
We have seen £2,000 bombs dropped on canvas tents. I have seen scenes that have absolutely changed me forever. Scenes of violence like I could never have imagined seeing. Just last night, I saw a father holding the head of his son. I cannot explain how many of those scenes I have borne witness to over the last 17 months. And at the same time, we have been watching a media narrative that is reducing this level of depraved violence to targeted strikes or limited operations. And that cleansing of these really, really gross and disturbing crimes is it is so criminal. And I think that everyone needs to have a really strong media literacy right now, to be able to understand that, you and I are the victims of the collapse of international law. The everyday person is the ultimate victim of that. Um,
Yeah, and I mean,
and
what's like that?
yeah, No, it's just like Ireland right now as a peacekeeper, as a nation that is new to independence, essentially. I should say independence in 26 counties, partial independence,
Sure.
that we should really, really be holding our own and cherishing that sovereignty and standing firm in it and not pretending as though we're somehow freeloading or being cowards. We give huge contributions. We've welcomed over 112 Ukrainian refugees, rightly. Just in March, we've given 100 million
112,000.
to Ukraine. Sorry, yeah, what did I say? 112?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
112,000, sorry. And just in March, committed a further 100 million to Ukraine. We've given a lot for a neutral country. So this idea that we're freeloading is nonsense.
No, and the government will always, you'll see as well, because, particularly Fianna Fáil, because their position was so strong in favour of neutrality back when it suited them, and Micheál Martin is on record as saying neutrality is, the triple lock is the core to our neutrality. Again, their manifesto in 2020 reaffirmed
Yeah,
their commitment to the triple lock as the core of our neutrality. They now have to try and change their position. So they're saying, oh, the world has changed. The world is a much different place to before. We need to get rid of the triple lock.
yeah,
The argument is actually that now the world needs neutral peace brokers more than ever.
exactly.
We do, like, for us to just be picking sides and siding with the US and NATO, which, let's be fair, I mean, NATO is 70% dominated by the US in terms of funding, in terms of military.
Absolutely.
It's not it's not too difficult to connect those two dots. The
Yeah.
the fact that we'd be throwing our lad in with one side or the other, it's no place for Ireland to be. As I said, we would have no significant impact to the level that we would ever be allowed to negotiate the start, middle, or end of that war. All we would be allowed to do is put our lives on the line. That's the only choice that we'd be given.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a weak position to take, and it's being framed as a strong
yeah, no,
position.
the world needs neutral peace brokers now more
Yeah.
than ever, and Ireland
Yes.
is in such a unique position to provide that. Like I said,
Yes.
um,
Hmm.
that's not something that should be thrown away. That's something that should be cherished.
I think so. I really believe that. Um, on just to try and give people, I suppose, an alternative vision of what we could be and where we're going. I don't know that, what are your hopes that we will be able to stop this from happening? And if it does, that I suppose that we could reverse it. We've been ruled by two centre right, increasingly right wing parties since the foundation of our state. The left in Ireland, the left wing movement, historically, I suppose the consensus would be that we haven't been so united, but we do start to see unity among those left wing parties in a way that we never have seen before. Starting to see them using language like the opposition is united, or the combined opposition. And I get very heartened when I see those parties speak and use that language. And I get very heartened when I see them stand together um, at the mic talking about how, they're united for the people. Um, where do you see that going? What do you think the hope is in Ireland that there will be a shift?
Well, when it comes to the issue of neutrality, this is not a left-wing issue. Across the
Mm,
board, people
mm.
in Ireland support and respect our neutrality and don't want to see it lost.
Yeah, in terms of the people. Yeah.
But even in terms of political parties, like I said,
Mm,
across that polling, we saw every single party, the vast majority of their voters supported neutrality. A2
mm,
are holding a rally on neutrality next month.
hmm.
A2 were speaking in the Dáil yesterday, and they're saying all the same things that we're saying.
Yeah.
Independent Ireland are saying the same thing. This is not a right-left issue. This is an all-Ireland issue. Everybody in Ireland is in agreement with this. That the government have nowhere to go on this, um,
Mm,
which is again is feels like a rare shift, because with a lot of things, Palestine and other things like that, it has felt like they were kind of more specifically left wing. No, not necessarily, but more so than this. This is actually from left to right across the spectrum. Um, People in Ireland do not want this, and
yeah.
that honestly does give me hope that the government are really fighting an uphill battle. Now they have set up the systems in the Dáil to suit themselves as best they can, but I would say to anybody listening, anybody concerned with this at all, first of all, first thing you do, insulate yourself to the fear mongering. Right, next time you see an article or a headline that says "Be afraid, be very afraid," take a deep
Yeah.
breath. Take 10
Yes.
seconds to think about where this is likely coming from. And the reality is that Ireland is an incredibly safe country, and we are not under threat from anybody. And our
Hmm.
neutrality plays a big role in that as well. But
Yeah.
first thing is to just take a deep breath, insulate yourself against that, and then get out and talk to people, talk to your neighbors, talk to people in your workplace. If you have family members in the defence forces, um, chances are the people you're talking to already agree with you. And we do need to link people up, link communities up with this, and then organise at more local levels, but even on an individual level, writing to your local newspaper, calling to your local radio station. Local newspapers are crying out for content.
Yeah, they're
You can send
brilliant.
them almost anything and they will publish it.
Yeah.
And we know that TDs read their local paper. TDs listen to their local media because that is what they care about most. I mean, if you take the Healy Rays as the most extreme example of that, like the Healy Rays don't really care about Ireland on a national level. They care about what's happening in Kerry, and that's as far as
Yes.
that goes.
Hmm.
Um, no, but seriously, and
I
most
know.
TDs in Ireland are actually like that.
Hmm.
So we've seen the government are on a weak footing at this. We're seeing their own tactics around cobbling together this fake opposition falling apart, and they're in a very weak position right now. And we just have to keep the pressure up. We have to keep pushing, speaking out. If we stay silent, they will push this through, no questions asked. But there's an awful lot more to be done. This campaign is only beginning, and we don't have to convince people that neutrality is a good thing. That's the government's job to do the convincing.
Yeah.
People already agree with us. We're in the vast majority. It's just
Hmm.
a matter of having our will and our opinions heard. But yeah, write in, call in, phone in, text in, use because they're doing it. Like we saw that
Yeah.
they're doing it. They're doing it
Yeah.
because they know it works. We have
Yes.
to do the same. There's far more of us than there are of them. And then do get out and protests, join marches. There will be more targeted stuff in key communities. There'll be town halls organised in certain constituencies and things like that. Get out, show up, join, put pressure on TDs in their locality where they care the most. Um,
Hmm.
this is not lost by a long shot. There is a ton of support behind this, but we do need everybody who values our neutrality to make themselves
Speak
heard.
up, to
Yeah.
speak up and understand what's on the line, really, because, and not to kind of believe the that line that our neutrality is safe, even if we undo the triple lock. Our neutrality is not safe.
No, the triple
Um,
lock is the only thing that confirms our neutrality. That's why they want to get rid of it because it works.
yes.
That's why you're seeing this assault on it. It's a very deliberate campaign to get rid of it because it works. It does exactly what we want it to do. It's an extremely well written
Hmm.
piece of legislation. Actually, if you look at what it allows us to do and what it prohibits, it allows us to do all the things that we would want from peacekeeping missions and things like that. You can evacuate Irish citizens abroad. That's another myth. We're allowed to do that. The Triple Act doesn't affect that. You can evacuate
Yes.
Irish citizens from disasters abroad already. That's not an issue.
Hmm.
The only thing you can't do is go and invade Iraq illegally. Like,
Yes.
why would you want that?
Exactly. Fantastic. Brian, thank you so much for your time. That was that was a really, really helpful conversation. There was a few things we mentioned throughout. So where I upload this, I will populate a few links like that article you mentioned at the very
Sure,
beginning.
sure.
And also we'll put a link in to sign the petition. Uplift have a petition on the triple lock. So we'll also pop that in as well.